Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is Eli Spang with the National Association of Regional Councils. Welcome to today's webinar on regional climate action planning and the work that Global Covenant of Mayors, or GCoM, is doing with regions. This webinar is a bit of a follow-up to our February conference where GCoM came to us in DC and facilitated a session featuring their 4 regional and metro scale climate leaders. That was a really good session, and I'm glad that we're now able to kind of follow up on that and have another session on that. We've got 2 speakers with us today. We're first going to hear from Ryan Glancy, who is going to provide an overview of the GCoM process and talk about what steps regions can take to join in that work that they're doing. And then we're going to hear from Tom Jacobs, who is the Director of Environmental Programs for Mid-America Regional Council in Kansas City. And Kansas City is one of GCoM's regional and metro scale climate leaders. And Tom is going to speak about the work that's underway there on their plan, as well as share the perspective just of everything going on in the region. They've always been at the forefront of this type of effort. So before we start with the presentations, I'm just going to make a quick note regarding questions. If during the presentations you have any questions, please just type those into the question box on the right side of your screen. We're going to save some time at the end to address all of those at once. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Ryan.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Eli. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah, sounds good.
Very good. Well, thank you, and thanks to NARC for hosting this webinar, and good afternoon to everyone on the call. My name is Ryan Glancy. Like Eli said, I'm working for the International Urban Cooperation North America program. It's a program that focuses on working with cities and regions to together to solve common problems around kind of sustainability and climate change. So in the context of this program, we're working with cities in the EU and North America. There's 2 components to the program. The first component is kind of a city pairing initiative between EU cities and North American cities. And the second component, which we're here to talk about today, is the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, or GCoM, as the acronym goes. And so today I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of what the GCoM is, some of the processes and approaches, and then some of its application through this pilot that Eli mentioned, the Metro Scale Climate Leaders, which is the 4 regions that we're working with in the US to kind of go through the GCoM processes. So yeah, next slide, please. So again, as Eli mentioned, this is a bit of a follow-up. We attended the National Conference of Regions, and again, many thanks to NARC for hosting us at that. We had some presentations from the 4 regions we're working with, as well as some staff from the European Commission there and National League of Cities and others to kind of talk about climate change work at the regional level and how we can support some of the smaller communities in this effort. And so this is a follow-up to that. I think the feedback that we got from that event was that very interesting work that we're doing, and we're just going to follow up today with a little bit more detail on what's involved. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'll just, for those that weren't, probably most of the people that called weren't at that event in Washington, so I'll just go back and give a bit of an overview and introduction to what the Global Covenant of Mayors is, and then I'll dive into a bit more detail on the process involved, how you join, what you need to do, and then think a bit more about the regional approach, so how COGs and MPOs and other regional entities can get involved in the Global Covenant of Mayors. Then I'll very briefly talk to the Metro Scale Climate Leaders Initiative and the regions that we're working with there, and a bit of the experience and the goals of that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tom in Kansas City for him to give his perspective on the GCoM process and how it's evolved in the Kansas City metropolitan region. Next slide, please, Eli. And you get one more. So, just to provide kind of a high-level overview, why the Global Covenant of Mayors is in existence. I think we're probably all quite familiar with the stats on this, where we're in a situation now where more than 50% of the world's population is living in cities, and that number is growing very, very quickly. Cities already account for more than 70% of global CO2 emissions, and that number continues to grow as well, with energy consumption over 2/3 as well. So, safe to say that obviously without cities taking action on climate change, then we're going to be in a difficult position when it comes to climate change, and we need to mobilize cities to act quickly. I think the other side of the Global Covenant of Mayors is that there's a recognition that cities and regions can be maybe a bit more dynamic and responsive to the urgency of climate change, maybe than some of the national counterparts. And so trying to galvanize and facilitate cities to take action quickly is a kind of key aim of the initiative. Next slide, please. So currently, the GCoM is, an association. It's over 10,000 cities now that are collectively committed to work on climate change. I'm going to use the term cities kind of throughout this presentation. It's the kind of default nomenclature that we're using in GCoM, but safe to say that that can apply to small communities, cities, counties, and regional organizations. Anything kind of below the national or state level is the kind of target audience for the GCoM. So we're at over 10,000 now, based in over 130 countries and representing more than 800 million people. The initiative relies very heavily on the support of a large group of partners worldwide. In the context of the US, we work very closely with the likes of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, ICLEI, C40, Climate Mayors, CDP, and others. And they are kind of providing the support to cities to kind of do this work. Next slide, please. So what does the GCoM aim to do? I mean, there's some inspirational promotional text on the left here, but basically I think, it's a recognition that a lot of cities around the world are facing very similar problems, and if we can connect them all to learn from each other and learn from the successes and failures, then we can be in a better position to respond to this quickly and get things moving faster. So the GCoM aims to kind of provide a networking service and cooperation and knowledge exchange, of best practice exchange between cities globally, first and foremost, but also trying to amplify the voice of cities at the international level. So in the UNFCCC processes, and as it relates to the Paris Agreement, trying to really drive home the potential impact of cities in achieving our common climate change objectives. We try to facilitate collaborations across all levels of government, so national government down to local, to try and make sure that all levels of government are working towards these objectives. And then at the global level, the GCoM has three key initiatives that are in place to try and support cities in this work, so-called Data for Cities, Innovate for Cities, and Invest for Cities, which I'll speak a bit more to now. Next slide, please. You get the next slide, please, Ida. There we go. So the Innovate for Cities initiative is kind of recognition that there are a lot of technological and informational challenges that cities are facing in regards to this issue. And basically, GCoM, through its international and national partners, is trying to mobilize research and development to try and address those issues that cities are facing around data, research, technology gaps that they're struggling with. So, I mean, one of the examples, incarnations of that is a partnership with Mission Innovation. For those of you that don't know about the initiative, Mission Innovation is a group of about 20 plus national governments who are working on kind of clean technology innovation. And so GCoM has a partner with that, is in partnership with that at the global level to try and make sure that the challenges being faced by cities are being addressed by that group, and then taking the benefit of that research by those national governments back to cities. The Invest for Cities initiative is about using the climate action planning process to unlock project pipelines and develop bankable projects related to climate change, and also trying to mobilize new solutions for finance and and then trying to also educate cities on some of the more non-traditional sources of finance that are available now around climate bonds or green banks. So obviously that can be a complex landscape for cities that aren't used to working in that arena. So trying to educate and build awareness of those opportunities to finance these climate actions, the infrastructures and the policies. And then finally, the Data for Cities initiative, one of the core principles of that is around trying to standardize the ways that cities are reporting this information so that we can collectively compare between cities and also aggregate the common impact of all of our cities that are part of the initiative, and trying to institutionalize the kind of plan, do, check, act process when it comes to climate action planning amongst all the cities that are part of GCoM. And then in addition to that, trying to help cities to make better data-driven decision-making. So examples there, the Global Covenant has some partnerships with the likes of Google and World Resources Institute. On the Google side, there's a tool called Environmental Insights Explorer, which helps cities with understanding emissions from transport in their jurisdictions, and also provide some data on how solar PV can be deployed in their cities and that kind of thing. On the World Resource Institute, they've got their data portal for cities, and that's a database that cities can use to help them develop their greenhouse gas inventory. So there's some data being provided to the GCoM members there to help them move forward in their planning process. Next slide, please. You can go one more, thanks, Eli. So I'm just going to now dive into a bit more detail. As I said, really wanted to just try and kind of highlight the process that the cities have to go through when they're joining the Global Covenant, and what's going to be required of them. And then I'll move on to, you know, how regional entities like the COGs and MPOs that are on this call, how you can be involved in this. There's a transition on this slide, Eli, if you just click one more for me. So first and foremost, there's a commitment letter, the Global Covenant Mayor Commitment Letter. So this is the administrative step for cities wishing to join the initiative, basically that commits the entity to the organization to developing a greenhouse gas inventory for the local jurisdiction or region that it's representing, undertaking an assessment of the climate risks and vulnerabilities and how to develop resiliency within the cities, looking at and agreeing upon greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets into the future, developing an adaptation vision and associated goals for that. And then finally, compiling all of that information into a plan that's formally adopted by the organization. So that's the kind of the commitment that the cities undertake. Next slide, please. So then there is a reporting cycle kind of aligned with that. So we require that the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the risk and vulnerability assessment, and the targets and goals on both the mitigation and adaptation side are developed within 2 years of signing that commitment letter. And then a climate action plan or plans, if the mitigation adaptation bits are being separated, is submitted in an additional year, so within 3 years. And probably worth noting at this point, you know, obviously the GCoM it's a voluntary initiative. You know, cities are volunteering to do work on this. So it's not that we're going to come to the end of these deadlines, and if you haven't submitted this information, then you're going to be expelled with no recourse. It's more that, you know, we're encouraging and supporting cities to work to this kind of time scale, and where there is a bottleneck or a pressure that's kind of stopping any city from delivering to these timescales, you know, we want to help understand what the issues are and try and solve those problems. So these aren't kind of set in stone. This is just the timescales that we hope to work towards. I haven't mentioned yet, but there's also plans for an energy access plan element that will be required in the future, but that bit is still being defined by the Global Covenants. There's no requirements there yet. And then after the plan is submitted, we ask basically that cities update us on their progress kind of every 2 years after that time, just to see how the implementation of the plan is going. And then every 4 years, we ask that cities update their greenhouse gas inventory so that we can see kind of the larger scale trend in hopefully emissions being reduced. over time. Next slide, please, Eli. So associated to all of those kind of tasks and timescales is our badges, our badging system. This is something that's actually really popular with all the cities and regions that we're working with, in the sense that it really provides a lot of credibility for the technical practitioners, the environmental teams that are doing this work, when they're going back to their executives or their politicians to really show, hey, we're following this best practice approach. We've been, our work has all been checked by the Global Covenant of Mayors, and we've been awarded this badge, or these badges, for the great work that we've done. So the badges are, firstly you get a what's called the commitment badge when you sign the commitment letter, and then there's a series of badges on the mitigation and adaptation side. For mitigation, one when the inventory is compliant inventory is submitted, one when a target has been agreed upon and submitted, and one for the plan. And then on the adaptation side, one for the climate risk and vulnerability assessment, one once you set your adaptation goals, and again, one for the plan. And maybe worth noting there that the mitigation adaptation plans can be a separate or in separate documents, or an integrated plan, combining the two. And then there's an additional badge when you've completed all your badges to show that you're fully GCoM compliant. And that is also obviously the kind of ultimate goal to reach that level. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm just going to pivot to a little bit of thinking about how more regional organizations can be involved. And there's a few ways of doing that from experience, across those 10,000 members and from the various countries and regions in the world. And basically, the GCoM kind of outlines three ways of a region kind of being involved in developing climate action plans. So option number one is basically a group of individual municipalities that want to go at the same speed and kind of work together. So in that instance, the local municipality would sign the Global Covenant of Mayors commitment letter and become kind of independent members of the GCoM, and they would also develop their own climate action plans, so a greenhouse gas inventory at their own local jurisdiction, and actions and targets associated with their own jurisdiction, but going at the same pace maybe as their neighboring municipalities, so that they can share some of the expertise and the processes involved. The second option would be where each individual local municipality would become independent members of the GCoM, but they would agree to work together on some kind of regional geography to develop a regional climate action plan. So a plan that goes beyond the municipal boundaries, maybe a group of 5 or 10 municipalities, and the kind of boundary for that climate action plan would be, the region represented by all of that group. And then the third option, and this is the option that our 4 metro scale climate leaders regions are working based on, is where the regional entity becomes the member of GCoM and obviously develops a regional climate action plan for that territory that it represents, with support then from the local municipalities to deliver that. So in the first 2 options, the COG or the MPO would really be in a supporting role, helping, with the common aspects that all the different individual municipalities, the challenges they're facing. And in the third option, there would be more of a leading role in compiling the information and working with the municipalities to create this common regional plan. Next slide, please. So I'm now just going to talk a little bit about some of the value or the demand, the reason why it's really useful for regional organizations to get involved in this conversation. So this slide shows a couple of charts based on some research that was undertaken a couple of years ago now by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And they looked at the municipalities that were engaged in one of the major climate change initiatives, not just GCoM, but some of the others in the US, and found that in terms of the number of municipalities, it's about 3% of the municipalities in the US that are engaged in one of those initiatives. But in terms of the population of those participating municipalities compared to the total population of the US, it's about 38% engaged. So what that's showing, obviously, and maybe perhaps there's a slightly better way to demonstrate that, but what this is showing is that it's mainly the larger municipalities that have the resources to engage in this conversation and act on climate change. And so there's a need there for us to find a way to support the smaller communities to bring them into this. Next slide, please. So this was also a huge challenge, and I'm going to refer back now to the EU Covenant of Mayors, which has been running a little bit longer, started in 2008. And this was a problem in the EU as well, where you know, the medium and smaller sized communities, municipalities, sorry, weren't able to engage properly on this agenda. And so that resulted in the EU creating, I mean, they call them territorial coordinators, but basically they're regional organizations that are supporting the EU Covenant Mayors. There's about 220 of them now. And that was based on that recognition that the small and medium-sized municipalities needed support. And then there was a lot of economies of scale to be achieved by, you know, helping them all create climate action plans at a regional level. And so this graphic on the right, and apologies if the text is a bit small, but would have taken me a lot of work to recreate this map. But basically, the green dots are municipalities that are members of the Covenant of Mayors that have support of a regional entity that's you know, supporting their work, and the red dots are just the independent members. So you can see these huge clusters of green that have sprang up, which are mostly smaller and medium-sized communities, based on the support that was made available to them from these regional organizations. So it's really this approach and this methodology that we're trying to, you know, replicate in the US, firstly through this Metro Scale Climate Leaders pilot, but then more broadly moving forward, hopefully. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, I mean, just to finish off on kind of the value that regional organizations can bring to this conversation, that we've talked about the shared resources and expertise, and, you know, helping smaller municipalities kind of go at the same pace through this work can be hugely useful. A lot of the issues that we kind of talk about in local climate action planning are transboundary issues anyway, which go beyond municipal borders. So especially those around transportation, clean energy generation, and waste. And so you know, collaborating at a regional level makes sense kind of thematically anyway. There's various economies of scale, I think, that can be achieved, both in terms of kind of sharing expertise and resources, but also more concretely in joint procurement. And I know there's been some good examples in Colorado where they did a joint procurement between a group of municipalities on electric vehicles. And I think there's been various examples around the country of similar joint procurement exercises on solar PV. So there's a good opportunity there. Also, you know, I think regionally and geographically, municipalities tend to share opportunities and threats as they relate to climate change on both the mitigation and adaptation side. So, you know, they're typically, you know, doing the same work and working on the same kind of actions and policies independently anyway. So bringing that together and making that more cohesive makes a lot of sense. It can help build a little bit more political momentum, perhaps. And you know, I think there's a good case study in that, maybe hear from Tom on the Kansas City side, is where they've grouped together and they've created an awful lot of momentum there. And you know, we had a webinar with them last week, and there was 270 plus participants from around the region that dialed in to hear about our climate action planning processes there. So it's been really successful. So you can build a lot of momentum at a regional level as well, I think. And I think the climate action planning processes can and you know, should impact on regional planning processes and long-term plans for these regions. So that integration is also can be useful. And then finally, you know, also hopefully helps foster some more regional autonomy when it comes to climate change and other issues. Next slide, please, Eli. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly talk about this Metro Scale Climate Leaders Initiative. Tom can talk a bit more to this after me. But basically, you know, we kind of recognized all the data that I presented, you know, that we showed that some of the smaller communities are struggling with this, and that there potentially was more of an opportunity to look at more regional metro scale coordination on this in the US. And so just over a year ago, we at IUC opened up a call asking for metropolitan regions and regional organizations to apply for some technical support with the idea that we would help them move through the GCoM process and develop climate action plans. So the aim there as well as providing kind of technical support, was to help them share their experience and try and demonstrate some added value, this kind of transboundary coordination I was just talking about. And the hope there is that we, will come out with 4 really high quality case studies from the regions we've been working with, and that we can then, share those both nationally and internationally to try and encourage even more regional organizations to join GCoM and lead the charge on that. Next slide, please. So yeah, this one just shows the 4 regions that were successful in that application that we've been working with for a little over 10 months now, I think. So the areas around Metro DC, Chicago, Kansas, and Denver Boulder. Side note here is that obviously, I've said that whether you're a city or a county or a region, you can join the GCoM. In DC and Chicago and Denver Boulder, you can see that there are some independent members of GCoM contained within those regions. So, that double level of GCoM involvement is not an issue, and indeed we encourage it. Like I said, we try to involve all levels of government in this planning process. So there's no issues there. If you have municipalities in your region that are already members of GCoM, you can just help to reinforce that work and expand it to the greater region. I think that's all I had. Next slide, please, Eli. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Obviously, what we would like is for more MPOs and COGs and regional organizations from around the US to come and join the GCoM as well, and follow in the footsteps of those 4 regions I just showed on the map. I think it's a good timing right now, in the sense we've got a lot of the lessons, a lot of the experience from working with those 4 regions that we're able to share with any other regions wishing to join in the next while. So if you've got any questions or interested to join, you can contact me via the email addresses here. And I look forward to hearing from any of you or any questions later on in this webinar. So with that, I will pass it over to Tom in Kansas to take it from here. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ryan and Eli. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with Ryan in this process. In fact, it's been invaluable to helping us make progress, the progress that we have made, and the opportunity to work with folks who are frankly ahead of us and probably better than us over in our peer communities in Chicago, DC, and Denver. It's just been a fascinating experience for us, and I think my goal from this presentation is to give you a little bit of flavor about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and to make the case for a regional approach to climate planning. I would add that we're very much a work in progress. We've done a lot of sustainability work over the years in diverse areas, from land use to watersheds and green infrastructure and other topics. And in a sense, this is an opportunity to pull some of that together, but we're very much at the beginning stages. So I want to caution you as you listen to say the takeaway is not what we've accomplished, but maybe a little bit about how we're organizing ourselves and our commitment to trying to see this through. So I would note at the beginning that I've got 5 bullet points on the left. I want to talk about each of those issues, a little bit about our history and these questions of scale, collaboration, analytics, and engagement and social equity. I mean, these are each elements that speak to our unique role to be able to provide leadership on climate planning in Kansas City. And I'll share a little bit more about each of those pieces as we move through. So next slide, please, Eli. So a quick recap on where we are. So Kansas City, we're right in the middle of the country. We serve 119 communities in 9 counties with a population of about 2 million people. Happily for this process, the city of Lawrence and Douglas County have joined us. So that added a 10th county to our planning area for this process. We're a conservative, development-driven Midwestern community. We don't have historically have not had a strong environmental lobby or advocacy oriented community. And so that in some ways has really positioned MARC to play a leadership role in trying to bring folks along to understand how what we're doing connects to where we've been and where we might go, and trying to link regional vision and local visions and plans to this larger enterprise. So next slide, please. I wanted to include this slide at the beginning of my presentation. I stole it from a gentleman named Steve Adams at the Institute of Sustainable Communities. And back in 2016, he visited us in Kansas City. He was a keynote speaker at a stakeholder meeting we held as part of an effort that was a precursor to the current one. We developed a regional climate action strategy after being named a climate action champion in the second term of Obama's administration. And at that point, we were able to kind of start queuing up this conversation and trying to get a very high level sense of maybe which way we should point in terms of policy and planning, even as we learn more. And when Steve Adams visited us, he was really making the argument that this work should be done regionally for all the reasons that Ryan just described. There's all kinds of economies of scale and efficiency. There's opportunities to take advantage of all kinds of existing networks that we might have on different topics, from public transportation to green infrastructure to energy efficiency and so forth. And that work then, in a lot of ways, works best when it syncs up with or is well aligned with local efforts. As we all might have experienced at many different junctures, the power of regional planning is only has efficacy insofar as it ties in directly to local interest and support and commitment and leadership. And so by our organizations having the opportunity to bring folks together and try and create that sort of alignment is simply fantastic. Of course, there's all kinds of needs to create strategies from a household level to a block or neighborhood or city, county, watershed, region. And at every different level, there's all kinds of different actions that can be taken. And I think in our plan, we're going to try and take a look at all of these different scales, both from a mitigation and an adaptation perspective. Okay, next slide, please. So our experience is a little bit different from our other three peer communities, insofar as we've partnershipped with a newly forming nonprofit group called Climate Action KC, which was started by two young elected officials, the mayor of Roland Park, Kansas, a small first-ring suburb, and a councilwoman, Lindsay Constance, from the city of Shawnee, Kansas. And the first is a population maybe 5,000 people, the latter maybe 40,000. And they were pumped up about climate change and asked what they could do. And what's resulted is the creation of this group. And it's an interesting organization because it includes over 100 elected officials at the state level, at the local level, from city councils to county commissions to water boards and school boards. And folks they have an incredibly strong bias towards action, and they're trying to figure out how can we catalyze new effort. And they approached MARC and MARC's board of directors to join GCoM in partnership with them and on their behalf. And so we made an application as part of the process that Ryan described, and we were successful in that application, and we're implementing all the steps in the GCoM planning process in partnership with the Climate Action KC. So that group blends a large number of elected officials together with lots of community advocates, from nonprofits to public agencies at every level, frankly, to folks in the private sector and in the civic community. And what's so interesting about that group is they've helped create all this incredible community energy. But then when you link that to the MARC and the regional planning infrastructure that we have, and trying to figure out how to embed stuff within a planning and policy context, it really provides a basis for an incredibly strong partnership. Next slide, please. So Climate Action's KC, this slide is really a year old, but it reflects what they've accomplished. They started out with a meeting in a church basement in December of 2018 to test local interest in the topic, and 130 people came on a rainy Saturday morning in early December, and that led to the creation of the group because everybody was so pumped up about all of this. And since that time, they've successfully advocated for a variety of issues in both state houses. They've produced something called a Climate Action Playbook, which is maybe 50 or so best practices that local governments could consider on using the 6 different large categories from the publication called Drawdown. And in there are locally demonstrated policies and programs and practices that have been tested by different communities around the Kansas City area and create a basis for others to emulate that work or tailor to their local communities. So we published that in December. In September of last year, we had a summit at Johnson County Community College that was attended by 750 people. And it was just the energy in that event was palpable. It was strong. We had terrific presenters, from Paul Hawken to the Lieutenant Governor of Kansas to our Congresswoman, to a variety of just outstanding speakers in different fields. And from that work, we then transitioned this year into the formulation of our plan, working on our inventory, our climate risk and vulnerability assessment, which are then feeding into the plan development itself. So next slide, please. Before I get into a few slides that kind of reflect our planning work so far, I wanted to come back to this issue about linkages between climate action KC and regional planning processes. And I view this as really important, I guess, because I'm a regional planner. But at MARC, we're involved in so many different kinds of issues like transportation and green infrastructure, hazard mitigation planning, affordable housing, emergency management, other kinds of things. And in every instance, there's a very long history of folks coming together to work on these issues and identify solutions that are well aligned with what you might find in climate plans around the world. So there's a high degree of support in Kansas City for transit-oriented development. Over the last maybe 10 years, we've created 3 new bus rapid transit lines. So we don't have a great transit system, but we're starting to build something out that's surely better than it used to be. There's a lot of support for complete and green streets. I think we have 14 jurisdictions that have adopted ordinances or resolutions in support of that. And so as we can facilitate alternative transportation that ties to sustainable placemaking, it's a real win. The image that I have here is of our regional greenway plan called Metro Green. It's a plan for 1,144 miles of greenway corridors, mostly following the major tributaries to the Kansas and Missouri rivers. So this is really the armature of our regional green infrastructure plan as we're trying to think about how do we maximize ecosystem service benefits, and that relates to work in stormwater and parks and the sustainable placemaking work that we've got underway. It's certainly the flood risk reduction piece certainly ties back to the work in hazard mitigation. So there's a strong alignment between our previous work and all of the stakeholders who are involved in that, and our work to develop strategies in the climate action plan that we hope will begin linking those things together and identify opportunities to really scale those activities up in different sorts of ways. So next slide, please. Going back to the climate resilience strategy that we put together in 2016, we developed some local downscale climate model projections for our region. I don't need to walk you through those in detail. Our key issues are heat and drought and flood. And each of those we're looking for ways to understand the direct and secondary impacts and try and understand how we can mitigate those and identify, resilient kinds of strategies to address them. Next slide, please. So as Ryan had said, just last Thursday, we had a webinar that, Ryan, you said 270 people. I think the total number of discrete individuals that signed in during the full hour and a half that we were online was 311 people. signed into this inventory where we presented the inventory and the risk and vulnerability assessment. And so figures like that are just astounding, and it's a reflection of the strong grassroots interest as well as some of the leadership interest in trying to figure out how to bring those together in our processes, our challenge and our opportunity. And so the pie chart you see in front of you it looks probably like most places in the country. Transportation is at 34%, and building energy use is at 60 something. And so that really lays out the challenge for us. Is how do we make a difference in those two areas. Next slide, please. On the risk and so from the inventory, we painted a picture of a future for us using business as usual projections. And I will tell you that this has been a tough challenge for us to put this together, to pull the data together. I will tell you, we worked really hard, and we put this stuff together, and it shows the nature of the challenge in front of us, how much we have to reduce by 2050 just to hit the 80% mark. It's a drop from where we are now at about 30 million metric tons to about 5 or 6. So that's a really significant effort for us. And I would point out that I know our data is wrong, right? Because it's just a model, and this is something I know we're going to need to improve on over time. Next slide, please. When moving on to the risk and vulnerability assessment, I know that we know that drought and heat and flooding are our main issues. Severe thunderstorms and tornadoes and severe winter weather are also at play for us. And so this is, this provides the basis for a lot of work. There's been resounding and persistent articulation of the need to address social equity as really a primary factor in our process. So next slide, please. So we expect to highlight that in all of our work moving forward. We spent quite a bit of time doing some GIS analysis to map a social vulnerability index. You can see the factors that were used. This map is very familiar to people in Kansas City. We have very concentrated poverty in the urban core of Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. It's interesting, though, that poverty is suburbanizing and different, and you can see other pockets elsewhere in the region where there are socially vulnerable demographics for different sorts of reasons. And so we've taken, I'm not showing it in this presentation, but we can take this index and then overlay it with areas of higher heat, and where there's higher urban heat islands, or where we could overlay it with 100 or 500 year floodplains and begin to see instances where we might need to focus moving forward. Next slide, please. So we've had the pleasure in this process of working with a consulting firm called Burrow Happold that was retained by the Global Covenant of Mayors, and the lead consultant shared this with our stakeholders. And it was interesting. I think some of our key opportunities are really common to what many might find from around the country. On the mitigation side, we know that building energy use and transportation contribute upwards of 90% of all of our emissions, and so we'll need to focus on renewable energy and energy efficiency. On the transportation side, how do we expedite electrifying our fleet and looking at different opportunities to facilitate biking and walking, and the whole issue of organic waste management and food security and food systems is very present, and thinking about large-scale carbon sequestration from landscape-scale green infrastructure approaches is clearly an opportunity. And on the adaptation side, we're concerned with flooding and heat, and so again, we're thinking about the kinds of solutions that are shown on the screen, thinking about heat islands and heat wave relief and cooling programs, climate resilience design standards, thinking about how we link transit-oriented development and complete streets with transportation plan focus on centers and corridors, and the sustainable placemaking kinds of issues. So these are things that are very clear in front of us, but really I'm hopeful that our process will yield a lot of creativity to help us think at a systems level as we're thinking about food systems, water resource management systems, energy, waste, health, and so forth, that we can begin to link these things together and see how creative we can get, whether at a policy level or a plan level, a program level, a project level. I had indicated before that social equity is just an absolutely critical issue for us, because it's very clear that the impacts of climate change will be disproportionately borne by those who are least able to deal with it. And so that's central to all of our work. Next slide, please. In Missouri is the show me state, and Kansas City is, we have a low risk threshold, and we always want to build from success. And so we spend a lot of time at MARC identifying best practices regionally and from the Midwest. And so I've got slides here, a complete street in the urban core, a passive house design, multifamily complex that's just almost completed in our River Market area. We've had an explosion of work in urban agriculture and urban orchards. We have about 15 communities that have adopted stream buffer, stream setback regulations, and are working on greenways and alternative transportation and stormwater management kinds of things and those sorts of corridors. And one I'd want to probably highlight most is the slide on the bottom right. The picture on the bottom right is from our from Harvesters, our community food bank. And I've heard people say before that the biggest measure of, or the most important measure of resilience really is about social cohesion. And so Harvesters is an entity where if you want to volunteer there today, you can't, because there's a waiting list. So many people want to help out. And their ability to step up to meet the unparalleled need for food that's doubled from where it was pre-COVID is just a reflection of the fact that people around here care about each other and are trying to help out. And so we've got a lot of success to build from, and some of these sorts of things will find their way into our plan, and we'll try and figure out how to be as smart as we can. And a lot of ways I think about what our challenge is about taking from our existing successes and figuring out how creative new collaborations will enable us to scale up. So for my last slide is the thing that we're doing to advance our plan is we're using an online platform called MindMixer. So next slide, please. It's an online platform that enables folks from throughout our region to get together and chew on different issues and prioritize solutions and discuss how we can package our smartest, most effective solutions. So that went live a couple weeks ago, and after our webinar last Thursday, we're all in on this, and we have, I'm going to guess, a couple hundred people on there today, and this is Transportation Week, so we're looking at different transportation solutions and priorities. You can rank and prioritize and vote on here. You can post pictures and videos. You can enter into discussions about all manner of different things, and all of that is facilitated or curated by our team from MARC and Climate Action KC. So I'm curious to see how this goes. I'm nervous about it because I've never been involved in a fully virtual planning process before, but it's what we've got. And we're bringing other people together outside of this platform in small group discussions to try and refine some of the content that will be a product of these larger group discussions. And so with that, I think I'll wrap up. One more slide. If anybody would like to contact me, my contact information is on the next slide. I'm at tjacobs@marc.org, and I'd be happy to provide more detail to anybody who might be interested. I like this photograph of it's of a white oak here in our area. It's one of the climax tree species. They grow to about 350 years old. So if you're actually thinking about planting with the 7th generation in mind, it's this tree. This tree lives 7 generations, and it's got remarkable ecological benefit in our ecosystem. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you, and I'll look forward to answering any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. And as Tom mentioned, we now have a bit of time for some question and answer. So just as a reminder, if you have questions, please enter them in the question box on the right side of your screen, and we will try to get to them. We can kick things off here with a question about some more detail on the membership process for GCoM, specifically like the action of signing up and what potential costs there might be for joining.
Yeah, so happy to answer that one. I mean, we can circulate the commitment letter for cities in the US that are wishing to join is available on the website, so I can circulate that around to folks that are on this call. Maybe some of the materials that we share after. There is zero cost to join. Yeah, it's it's a self-sustaining initiative, so it's not no membership fees or any costs associated with it. The other thing I would say to that is obviously, with the 4 regions we're working with in the US and the technical support that Tom just outlined, obviously that's a pilot project, and there's not the same technical assistance that's offered to all of the 10,000 cities part of GCoM. There's a help desk that's available. I think I had the email address for that on the slide when I finished, for technical questions, but there is support infrastructure in place, let's say, but there's no kind of direct assistance available to all cities. But no, so there's no cost, and we can circulate the information for cities or regions wishing to join.
All right, thanks, Ryan. We've got another question coming in here regarding challenges with data and getting that data understood by the various groups that you might be trying to message with that data. Do you get stuck discussing the data issues, or do folks get past that fairly easily?
Well, maybe I'll start and Ryan will add as he chooses. This was a bear for us to pull all of this together. Our utilities were absolutely on board. We've had strong relationships with them for a long time, but they haven't been accustomed to collecting the information in a format that was required for this inventory, and so it was a slow road getting there. I would note that because of our own staff constraints at MARC, we focused on what we knew to be the biggest issues of transportation and building energy use. We also worked on waste. There's maybe 15 total categories of sectors from which emissions can be tabulated, and we did not take on all of the smaller ones because of our staff limitations. And so we know we hit all the biggest ones, and we know since we didn't have the time to dig into everything that we're probably undercounting our emissions. And so really that gives us an opportunity to get better over time. And since we were successful in this first run through, then when we try again, it'll be even better. And the thing I would say about data is while I know our outcomes are not precise, I don't think it really matters. The important thing is we know what the trends are, and we know that we have a lot of work to do. And if our current regional emissions are 30 million metric tons or 35, either way, we've got a lot to do to make a difference. And the nature of the solutions and our approach to dealing with those probably doesn't change. And so you got to measure so you're on track and you can claim success and you can understand where you've made progress. But at the same time, I'm not one to be overburdened by the strengths or weaknesses inside a particular data management system, because our goal is to create viable mitigation and adaptation strategies within the construct of a broader resilience and sustainability program. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, and just to follow up on Tom's comments, I would say Tom's story is definitely not unique, and this is a challenge for all the cities that come to this, especially if you haven't been working on it previously. So, but we from the GCoM side kind of see this as an important part. I think perhaps how the GCoM separates itself from some of the other climate initiatives in the US and elsewhere internationally is it really tries to put some teeth and evidence behind the political commitments that folks are making, and obviously if you're going to put teeth behind it, then you need some evidence and some data to back that up. So I think it is a challenge, and I think going through it the first time, like Tom just said, is tough and building expertise, but I think, you know, second time, third time around, that becomes much more straightforward. And with regards to, you know, the real challenges specifically around data, you know, I think that a lot of them are working with the utilities, and that's a common problem around data privacy and stuff like that. So engaging with the utilities to see what they're able to provide is the first step. The other areas, I mean, the other traditionally tricky area around this is collecting transport data, and the initiative I mentioned with Google earlier today has made a big difference in that sector, I think, where they can provide some real accurate data on the transportation side. So again, if you're coming into GCoM and you want and need data on the transport side, it's not as difficult as it used to be to get that information. And then some of the others around waste and stuff should be a bit more straightforward, where there's, you know, a public dynamic to that in a lot of cities. So collecting that information usually isn't so the data isn't so private, so it's usually a bit easier to get your hands on. So, but again, our help desk, the GCoM help desk, is here to kind of support you through those processes, to share experience of what other cities have done to get that information. But we do acknowledge it as a challenge.
I might just add one more thing on the transportation side. That was actually the least painful side for us, since we were in the middle of our transportation plan update. We were able to take advantage of all of our transportation modeling that was done for that plan and use it on this side as well.
That's kind of a good transition into another question, transportation related here. Is MARC planning to incorporate this climate action plan into its TIP project evaluations or selections, and if so, how?
I could share details with who's ever asking the question. So at a high level, we're trying to figure out how to crosswalk all of our regional plans. And in the transportation plan, there is a resilience section. And from that, for our scoring criteria, we've just launched another project, a call for projects, and we have a variety of criteria for those. There's a lot, right, from system efficiency to safety. There are now resilience and other environmental criteria that are specifically included in those, and I'd be happy to share the details on that. But they constitute a fairly significant percentage of the points for project selection, and so we are requiring that folks address it in their applications. However, we are not in any way prescriptive about how they do so. So we are always we're always thinking about looking for context sensitive solutions and that fit local conditions. I think in a lot of ways, I would argue that using a climate lens to support project, plan and design can lead to small tweaks that, when aggregated at a regional scale, can begin to make a huge difference. And so, yeah, we do have these scoring criteria, and we spend a lot of time on it, and it does influence those who are submitting projects for consideration for funding.
All right, thank you for that, Tom. All right, we are getting to the end of the hour, so I think we'll wrap it up with that. A big thank you again to Tom and Ryan for presenting today, and thank you to everyone who joined us today and who asked questions. And I would say, if any questions come up, definitely feel free to contact Tom and Ryan. They shared their contact information, but feel free to send things my way as well, if that would be useful. And we'll be sending out a recording of this, as well as hopefully sharing the slides after we wrap up. So thank you again, all of you, for being a part of the webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks, everyone. All the best.